The broadcast of the Minneapolis Committee of the Whole will now begin.
Thank you and good morning to everyone. My name is Jeremiah Ellison. I'm the chair of the Committee of the Whole. I'll call to order this special meeting for Friday. Today is not Friday, for Wednesday, June 9th. I'll note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the Minnesota Open Meeting 13D-021 due to the declared state of local public health emergency. Additionally, the city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel. This meeting is public and subject to the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Wright.
Present.
Gordon.
Here.
Fletcher.
Here.
Cunningham.
Present.
Osman.
Here.
Goodman.
Present.
Kano. Bender. Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Palmisano. Members present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Colleagues, we have one item today, and that is a presentation from our budget director on Mayor Frye's proposed amendments to the 2021 budget relating to the first phase of proposed funding under the American Rescue Plan Act. Before we begin, I'd like to review my plan for conducting today's meetings. First, I'll recognize the budget director, Amelia Kruver, for the staff presentation. If there are specific issues or questions, council members can enter their names to the chat. I will note that we are joined by many of our department heads for today's meeting, so they are on standby to respond to questions or issues that might be raised. Once we've completed the presentation, I'll open the floor to more general comments or questions from council members, or any specific issues that council members may have in response to the staff presentation. If we reach 12:30 and we have not yet completed the presentation or our discussion, we will adjourn to tomorrow's meeting to tomorrow morning at 10 to finish our initial discussion. That meeting's agenda has already been posted to LIMS for public access. If we finish the bulk of our discussion today, however, I will adjourn today's meeting and direct the clerk to cancel tomorrow's meeting. So hope that's clear. Prior to adjourning, I'll also review the remaining timeline for this budget process and then close today's meeting. Are there any initial questions from my colleagues about that plan? All right, not seeing any. I know that we have a few council members still trying to get into the call, and I'm sure my colleagues will all be joining, and I'll recognize folks as they're able to join the meeting. With that, I'll welcome Ms. Kruver and ask her to present the staff analysis of the proposed revisions to the 2021 budget. Mrs. Kruver, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I'm Amelia Kruver, I'm the budget director, and today I'm going to start by giving an overview of the mayor's recommendation for this phase 1 planning of using American Rescue Plan dollars. I will, as Chair Ellison stated, we have the experts, department directors on hand to answer any follow-up questions after my sort of high-level overview is over. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please.
Real quick, Amelia, I'd like to recognize that Council Vice President Jenkins has joined the meeting. Continue.
Great. So the agenda for today is just to start with a very brief refresher on what the legislation is that's providing this funding, review the guidance that we are following, that the authorized uses for these dollars, and then move into the mayor's recommended proposals with plenty of time at the end for question and answers. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a review. You'll remember Director Moore reviewed this, I think, a few Committee of the Whole meetings ago, but just to repeat, the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund is a portion of the American Rescue Plan Act. And Minneapolis is slated to get $271 million through this fund. We will be receiving these dollars in in two pieces. We've already received the first $135 million, and we will be receiving the second $135 million in May 2022. And this is how all cities that are receiving direct funding from the federal governments are receiving their allocations. These funds are available to be spent through 2024. They must be committed by the end of 2024, but there is 2 additional years to spend down committed dollars. So a little bit different from the CARES money we received last year, which needed to be spent before the end of 2020. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. And a reminder that the American Rescue Plan Act has also provided some of our neighboring jurisdictions with funding. The state has received about $2.8 billion. They're planning to use about $1 billion of that in their budget negotiations that are ongoing. And they'll have some remaining dollars to spend for this year, responding to the public health crisis, and in future years. Hennepin County has approximately $245 million, and our public school system, Minneapolis Public Schools, will have about $160 million. Other legislation is being currently worked on in Congress. We are expecting a potential infrastructure bill, and then the regular federal appropriation bill are 2 pieces of legislation that I know we're watching to make sure that we are using our dollars wisely and being aware of any other potential funding opportunities that come our way this year. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Perfect. So a reminder about the overall guidance from Treasury. These dollars can be spent essentially on a response to the pandemic and its economic impacts. The guidance is broader than the guidance that was given for the CARES dollars the city received last year, but there are still some areas of uncertainty. So I'll highlight those when I walk through this. The first eligible use is responding to the public health emergency. So in anything that is addressing public health needs, mitigating the pandemic, vaccines, testing, contact tracing, that kind of thing is very much within authorized uses. The second big area is responding to the economic crisis caused by the global pandemic. And so support for families that have been hard hurt, small businesses, direct aid to some workers, which we'll get to a little bit later in this slide, as well as industries that have been really hard hit, like the tourism and hospitality industry, are all authorized uses for these dollars. I'll pause and say that for both the public health response and the economic hardship, the guidance really encourages an equity lens in deciding on how to spend dollars. They ask you to assume that any disparities that existed both in public health outcomes and in economic recovery efforts that existed before the pandemic hit were exacerbated by the pandemic. And so programs and dollars spent to address that exacerbating effect is okay, an authorized use for these dollars. So moving on to the next authorized use, revenue loss. The guidance states that with these dollars, we can provide public service to the extent of revenue loss. So that sounds pretty open-ended. And this is an area where I know we in Minneapolis, as well as our colleagues across the country and other states and counties and local jurisdictions, are asking a lot of questions of our partners in the Treasury, just to make sure that we are understanding what the actual limitations are. That questions like, does this have to be a program that we spent money on before the pandemic? Does this need to be a direct service? Those kinds of questions are still being answered. And so that is why this revenue loss category could really free up the limitations on these dollars, but is still a little bit unknown to us. And so it's wise to use caution when going down the route of this authorized use. And I'll speak to that a little bit more in the presentation as well. Premium pay. So the guidance from Treasury says that folks that have been on the front lines, essential workers, a premium payment to compensate for the risk and the work they've been doing over the last year is an authorized use. And again, you see the guidance emphasizing an equity lens by asking jurisdictions to focus on low and middle wage workers when considering spending dollars in this way. And then the last use is water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So spending dollars on anything related to our water and sewer infrastructure is an okayed use, as well as expanding broadband. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So 3 explicitly called out ineligible uses are depositing money into a pension fund, spending dollars on legal settlements or judgments, as well as simply replenishing rainy day funds. And then any kind of debt service is also not allowed. And these really support the overarching, or one of the overarching goals that the federal government has for these dollars, which is to aid in the economic recovery of the country. A lot of folks have learned the lesson of the last Great Recession in 2009, 2010, that local austerity measures led to a much slower economic recovery. And so there is a focus on spending money, getting it out the door into the hands of community, and ensuring that cities and local jurisdictions don't have to lose as many jobs as were lost in the last recession, or cut services that would negatively impact the economic recovery. So that's why things like depositing in rainy day funds or use on debt service are not allowed, because they really want to see these dollars out moving around in the community. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, perfect. So I also want to provide a little bit of context for Minneapolis before we dive into the mayor's recommendations. Up here, you'll see a graph that shows our revenue loss in 2020 using the specific formula dictated by the guidance from Treasury. So one of the things that the original legislation that came out in March, that was signed in March, said was, in order to figure out how much revenue loss you've experienced, you should compare 2019 revenues to 2020 revenues. In the new guidance that we've received, about a month ago, they say actually a counterfactual is fine. And so in other words, in a scenario in which there was no pandemic, a straight line estimate of what your revenues might have been without the economic downturn compared to actual revenues is actually a more accurate calculation for what the city has lost in terms of revenues. And so that's what this chart right here is showing you. The city had grown pretty healthily in the last couple of years. And so when we just use a straight line estimate and compare it to our actual revenues in 2020, we have a revenue loss of about $280 million. So so that graph sort of shows you, according to ARP rules, what our revenue loss were. And then I've included a little summary of our response to that revenue loss as a city. So you'll remember in 2020, there were budget cuts mid-year to make sure that we could take responsible steps to the crash in our revenues. We reduced budgets across the city by over $80 million for the second half of 2020. We used $50 million in cash reserves, and we refinanced some debt, as well as shifted some cash capital spending into debt financing. In 2021, we also implemented cuts across the city to all departments, and there are currently over 300 positions that are being held vacant so that we can lower spending in response to our lowered revenues. Go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so with that grounding in the legislation, the guidance, and the context that we're in, I'll go ahead and walk through the mayor's recommended proposals for phase 1 of ARP. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Perfect. So some guiding principles that went into the selection of these proposals. One, they were focused on immediate need. So they're focused on housing instability, public safety, responding to the economic crisis, and really focused on getting small businesses and folks that have been harmed by the economic recession ready and able to take advantage of any opening up that happens this year in 2021. So these are immediate needs. That was the focus for these proposals. Also focused on one-time spending. So there are a few exceptions, and I will note those as we walk through, but the vast majority of this money is on one-time projects. And that's important because if we are adding ongoing spending with one-time support from the federal government, we need to make sure that we have sustainable revenues within the city to handle those costs when the one-time support from the federal government goes away. Otherwise, we're setting ourselves up for a fiscal cliff where we would need to either engage in additional cuts or sharp increases to our revenues. So the
Real
next
quick,
principle, oh, go ahead.
Well, first, I just wanted to say that we've also been at a while ago, not just now, but we're joined by the council president, Lisa Bender, as well as Councilmember Paul Massano. So just wanted to make note of that. And if any of my other colleagues are in the meeting who I didn't recognize, feel free to let me know. But we also have a question, I believe, from Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I have a question for Ms. Kruger. You noted that there were 300 vacant positions that we are holding open. Is there a concentration or a sense of where those positions are throughout the enterprise?
Yeah, so I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that as a part of our documentation for the 2021 adopted budget, we have a schedule that lays out sort of by program where those frozen positions are, and I'm happy to share that after the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I'll move on to the next principle if there's no more questions. Oh, sorry, can you go back a slide? I got a couple more to talk about. Thank you. So the last one is that these proposals should fit cleanly within the guidance. I mentioned before that the guidance around what counts as public service for revenue loss is kind of unclear. And we've been working again with colleagues in through the Government Finance Officers Association, through the U.S. Council of Mayors, to try and work with other cities and local jurisdictions around the country to see what they're thinking. And we're finding that this question is coming up a lot. What does it mean by providing public service to the extent of revenue loss? So we have stayed away from using that authorized use in these first round of recommendations. And that's because the rule that we have is called an interim final rule from Treasury. They are asking for and accepting comments and questions they're in the middle of a 60-day period that ends in mid-July. So we expect that likely in August, we will get more clarity and that it is a safer bet to wait until round 2 to spend money on that authorized use. The next principle we've talked about a little bit before when I've come here is the balance and tension that exists between spending money quickly, getting money out the door, and reserving a healthy amount of funds to be allocated after more engagement, after more communication with our partners in other local jurisdictions that will also be spending these money, and after a really solid analysis of what those future revenues are at the city that could sustain any consideration of ongoing funding with ARP dollars. And the last one is we've incorporated and tried to identify where proposals are helping to meet SREAP goals and are working to make sure that the specifics, the details in these programs as they're implemented will be as aligned as possible with our city's SREAP goals. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so in total, this authorizes these proposals make up about $88.7 million in 2021. The spending is largely focused on housing and economic development, which is why you see CPED taking up much of the pie because of the work that they do on those 2 big goal areas. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So the first area is housing and homelessness. The Treasury guidance generally asks local governments that are spending these dollars to think about how people and families and businesses have been harmed by the pandemic and how your proposal program or spending will specifically address that harm. So the proposals in this section are really aimed at folks that are experiencing homelessness or sorry. Oh, I think I'm just getting. I'll keep going. There we go. Perfect. So folks that are experiencing homelessness, folks that are at risk of losing their homes, but it also has proposals that address existing inequities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So there are specific proposals in there to get low-income folks into home ownership as well as BIPOC folks into home ownership. And that is $28.3 million of this total proposal. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So the next big chunk of spending, $37 million, is around economic rebuilding. And so one of the first authorized uses is responding to businesses and people who have been harmed by the economic downturn caused by the pandemic. And so in this proposal, you'll see lots of funding going to proposals at CPED, and they are focused on a couple of things. There is a cluster of proposals around cultural districts that are focused on technical assistance, improvements to buildings, as well as just services like trash pickup, street lighting, making sure that folks are encouraged and feeling good about visiting local businesses again. There's also a lot of enhancement to our small business support. And those folks can speak a little bit more in depth to those proposals after we get through it. But this is the largest area of spending in the mayor's proposal, and it is aimed at really supporting those folks that have been harmed by the economic downturn. I will say there's also a proposal in there to support arts and artists directly. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So public safety. This is about $11 million, $11.5 million of the proposal is aimed at public safety. And these are dollars that are addressing what nationwide has been experienced during the pandemic, which is an increase in crime. So the guidance asks us specifically to, again, look at the negative impacts caused by the pandemic and think of proposals that specifically address that. So nationwide, there has been an increase in crime. These are proposals that are aimed at violence prevention, as well as increasing spending on some of the current programs going on in our Office of Violence Prevention, as well as funds to support youth programs. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So climate and public health. The federal guidance says that any response to the public health crisis is an authorized use. In addition, the guidance encourages local jurisdictions to take a look at disparities that existed in public health before the pandemic that have been exacerbated during the pandemic. So you will see proposals in here around food access, mental health care, as well as a proposal aimed at eliminating childhood lead poisoning. We know that children have spent much more time in their homes over the last year than they normally would, with schools going remotely. And so these proposals are aimed at impacting sort of the social determinants of health broadly. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The last one is building city capacity and performance. And this is about $6.6 million. And in here, you'll see support to implement these programs. So there are about 10 temporary FTEs included in here to help support the programs that are funded through these proposals. And there are also additional dollars that are going to the convention center via Meet Minneapolis so that they can help revitalize the tourism and hospitality industry that has been hardest hit in Minneapolis. There's also dollars in here going to our IT department to help connectivity in neighborhoods that don't have regular access to high-speed internet, which has been just a lifeline to some families during the pandemic who have been doing everything from home. So that, I believe, is our last big goal area. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I have a couple things that I just want to highlight for you as you guys are diving into the specific proposals. And the one question that I've already gotten from some folks is about FTEs. So there's two kinds of FTEs included in these proposals. One is temporary positions. So as I mentioned, there's about 10 temporary FTEs funded in departments like finance, HR, as well as support in IT, and I believe I'm missing one, as well as in our Department of Race and Equity as they prepare for participatory budgeting process to be funded in the second round of ARP deliberations. So there are some temporary positions in there. There is a temporary position that included in the community food needs proposal, as well as a few in the green cost share proposal. Just to facilitate moving the large increase in funding out the door in an efficient way. There's also one proposal in the public safety goal area called civilianization. And this proposal is aimed at hiring, unfreezing positions that are currently frozen to perform duties that sworn officers in MPD are currently doing so that those sworn officers can be freed up to respond to emergency needs. And so the idea is that these are unfreezing positions, and the ongoing impact of bringing back those positions after 2021 will be something that is considered and dealt with in the mayor's 2022 budget. So it's a little bit of a different flavor of FTE in these proposals. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So I also want to address proposals with costs in the tails. So these proposals, as I mentioned, were really chosen because they are one-time in nature to try and get money out the door. Several of these proposals you'll see again likely in our round 2 deliberations because they are there is an ongoing need. These proposals, just this handful, we are including authorization of spending into the years 22 and 23 because they are either hiring staff, and we want to hire staff for 2 years at a time instead of in 6-month chunks, or it's providing a service. So you'll see that mental health care for city staff, which is one of the proposals, that is included funding for the rest of 21 and 22. It's expected that in 23, we will be able to sort of assess how it's going and make a determination if we should roll that into our regular provision of benefits and pay for it the way we do the rest of our mental and our medical care for city employees. And for implementation at the city, so those 10 temporary positions I talked about, there's funding for 3 years or 2.5 years so that staff can stay, can help with the implementation, the reporting, and all the requirements that are attached to the federal dollars. So the other two, public safety, workforce training, community service officers. So this is adding an additional class of CSOs. And so it is one time, but because folks that are involved in this program are working on getting higher education certificate, the program is 3 years long. So there's sort of one-time 3-year cost for adding those CSOs. And then the civilianization proposals I mentioned would be unfreezing positions using ARP dollars to pay for those positions in 2021, but it's the intention of the mayor to consider the ongoing spending of that in his 2022 recommended budget. So these are the exceptions to that principle I mentioned earlier about funding that is reaches into 22 and 23. The rest of the proposals are one time, and any additional authorized spending in ARP will come through round 2. Go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so that's my overview of the proposals and the mayor's phase one recommendations for American Rescue Plan dollars. And I will stand for questions. And I know we have our department heads that are implementing these programs on hand to answer any specific questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. And I see that we have Council President Bender in the chat.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to you, Ms. Kruger, and the staff who've worked really quickly and really hard to put this all together. I think my biggest question kind of overall as a theme is, I mean, there's so many great ideas here, a lot of things that I think, well, there would be a lot of consensus. My biggest concern is about the capacity in the various areas of our city's departments and the enterprise to implement this work. And I think there's quite an unequal amount of capacity depending on how the department is structured and how much this fits into the normal structure of the department. So how would you recommend we get a better understanding of how many FTEs are available to administer these programs? What kind of capacity is there in our existing city department staff to evaluate programs, especially that are in a pilot phase? I'm a little concerned that we continue to ask in some departments a very small group of staff to do 9 jobs, where other departments are better resourced because they're set up to administer grant funds and do evaluation work as more of their day-to-day operations in a typical year. And I think I would like to get some detail about that. Like, I would like to see, if possible, the org charts, the number of FTEs, if there has been identified the names of the staff people who would be responsible for administering new programs, or to the degree to which it's possible. I think this needs to be answered in some detail, because I think this has been an ongoing and perpetual problem that we haven't been able to figure out how to solve at a policymaker level. And we do, I think, bear responsibility as policymakers to dig into this and ensure that we're not continuing to overload staff with impossible expectations.
Yeah, so I will start by giving just a little bit more information, a little more detail about the proposals that I kind of went through quickly. I think that big picture, there are several opportunities to think about staffing at the city in the next 6 months. This is certainly one, and I think especially funding temporary staff for the for proposals that are getting large increases in dollar amounts is totally fair game for this round of ARP spending. I think also in the 2022 budget conversation, when we think about that full number of 300 frozen positions that are existing at the city right now, that's also a chance to dig a little bit deeper into just the existing, how many people are we funding in the base, to your point about capacity and disparities that may have been built in over time. And then the next one is around ARP funding, the next chunk of ARP funding. Once we are, my staff right now are working on solid revenue assumptions that we can use to forecast over the next 5 years, so that we can have a better understanding and more confidence in what kind of spending on FTEs and on our current service level we can bear in 2025. And so that will open the door to where can we maybe increase, add back FTEs using ARP dollars in a way that's sustainable by future revenues. So, and just real quick to give some details, the implementation proposal for part-time staffers, it includes help in 2021 for communications It includes 5 FTEs at CPED because they do have the bulk of the funding in this recommendation. It includes 3 FTEs in finance, 1 in budget, 1 in procurement, because these proposals will be rolling through our same procurement process and we know they'll need support, as well as 1 in our grants team, grants accounting, so that they can focus on all the sub-recipient requirements in federal grants like this. There is a grants manager in health. There are 2 HR representatives that are a part of this to prepare for the hiring that we'll be doing. There is support for IT, and then there's the support for the Department of Race Equity.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I'll just say that, you know, to the department heads or division directors or folks who will be implementing this, we need to know now if this isn't workable, because as policymakers, we don't make management decisions. We are not in a role to manage the day-to-day operations of the city. We are policymakers, and we have to use the times where we're making policy to make sure that we are doing that from a lens of something that will work operationally. So this is the time to let us know if anything here is not going to work from an operational or management perspective when we still have time to do something about it. Thanks, Ms. Kruger.
Thank you, Council President. And I just want to note that Council Vice President Jenkins noted that that was also the point that she was trying to make earlier, which I think just indicates how much of a concern it is. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. And thank you, Ms. Kruger. I wonder if you can just clarify for us. So I recognize that there's spending commitments that we're being asked to make in this proposal that go into 22 and 23. Are the 2022 and 2023 amounts included in the dollar amount that we're considering as part of phase 1, or are we committing part of phase 2 by approving these projects with the kind of urgent, timely funding, knowing that part of phase 2 dollars are going to have to go to support commitments that we're making this month, you know, as a part of this process. So I guess if you can just sort of clarify that for us about if we're sort of if we're actually committing more than it seems like we're committing, which it kind of looks like to me from a couple of the spreadsheet items.
Yes, so great question. And this is something that I think we need to clarify a little bit more from our rollout on Friday. So just for those positions, we are including authorizing those amounts in round 1. So the authorized amount for 2021 spending is 88.7 million. Then there is some tail spending that would also be authorized in this proposal of about, I think it's like 10 or 12 million to support those staff, as well as the mental health expansion for city employees. So that's a good question, and we're hoping to clarify that a little bit today.
Thank you.
Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Charleston. And I just actually wanted to kind of follow up on the same vein as Councilmember Fletcher, specifically on the green cost share. Those are fantastic investments, and I'm really excited to see them there. But kind of to your point, Director Culver, like when will we kind of see what is in kind of the next version of funds, or kind of what the vision is from the directors of those departments?
So that's a great question, and I'll pause if anybody wants to speak directly to them. I know you will see proposals coming very likely for green cost share investments in the future, because as you mentioned, there is clear demand for those dollars. That's one of the rationale for including it in this funds, because we know there are folks that are eligible and in need of that funding. So I think the decision about how many of these programs to keep spending money on in round 2 will be a difficult one. $271 million is going to go fast because of these proposals and I think the quality of them. So I will if there's anybody else here that wants to speak to the green cost share program, but I think your question is a good one, and we'll have to sort of tackle phase 2 when we get there.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I don't see anybody else coming to speak up on that issue. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Councilmember Ellison, and thank you, Ms. Kruger. This has been a really great presentation, and I'm excited about many of these investments. I'm excited to see them. You know, many of these things are things I've been fighting for years now, and so I'm excited to see it. You know, I just want to reiterate the concern around, you know, these are things I would like to see ongoing in a budget as well. You know, one of the things that we know from public safety related research is that we can invest very heavily in interventions and various strategies and different approaches, and then we lower the crime and violence, and you know, people are starting to feel safer, and then we're like, great, we don't need to invest in that anymore, and then it goes right back up. We've seen that even here in Minneapolis when we implemented a similar version of GBI in the 90s. We saw homicides go down. It was no longer invested in. So we've seen that even here locally. And so, you know, I just want to, you know, agree and uplift with my colleagues' concerns, specifically just speaking to, you know, public safety issues, knowing the ebb and flow of funding for strategies, because it's like once things start to, and this happens in public health too, where it's like things start to work, and so then people are like, great, we don't need to invest in that anymore, and so there's programs long term. I think that that's important, because what I'm going to be supporting here, you know, as we're moving forward, are largely going to, like the things I'm seeing here, I'm super excited. Like, you know, we need funding. GBI junior, or the adolescent based GBI, that's directly connected to the staff direction that we unanimously passed last year. And so I'm excited to see funding going into that to implement it. But teens are still going to need that support, right? And so, you know, I just want us to think about, yes, we need to address the immediate needs, and also how are we being mindful in this process, connecting it to future spending. I don't want us to be able to like say, yeah, put money to that, pat ourselves on the back, did good, and then but it's completely unsustainable. I did have a specific question, and this is for the health department. Is the proposed money for the lead poisoning elimination, is that connected to the eliminating childhood lead poisoning action plan that we initiated through council? Like, are those two things connected? Do we have anyone here from the health department? Patrick Hanlon would probably be the best person to answer that,
Yes.
but
So I say I suspect the answer is yes, and I'll get a answer for you. Oh, sounds like someone's here.
Yeah, this is Noaa. I'm sorry, I do not know an answer to that particular question. You are right, Patrick Hanlon would be the best one to answer it. We can get you an answer.
Great, thank you. I just want to make sure we're not accidentally duplicating work. So great,
Sure.
Thank you.
Great. I'm gonna call back on the council president. Council President Bender has a few more questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was hoping to ask Director Brennan some questions about the housing and homelessness proposals. And there likely may be questions from other council members who work on some of the other key areas similarly. And I know we can also follow up, but Director Brennan, I think this is a good example of a topic where it would be helpful to hear a little bit more about the timing of getting the funding out the door, and what we can expect, and what we can help what kind of expectations to share with community. I think the proposal is a really good balance of immediate short-term strategies like getting folks out, doing direct service and encampments, helping connect people to services, and some longer-term investments that will help in the long term with housing stability. Can you give us a picture of the amount that's been proposed? How quickly it will be getting out the door? Will we still be using the typical RFP process, which can take months? And just help us understand the timing of some of these proposals.
Sure, Council Chair Ellison and Council President Bender, I can do that. So there's 5 main categories of housing and homelessness response proposals, and I will just touch briefly on all 5 of them. The first is housing stability for low-income renters and homeowners. That's about 7 million of the 28 million proposed. And this is to, again, provide some immediate relief for both renters and homeowners who are facing pretty severe housing instability. The Affordable Homeownership Preservation Grant Program of $200,000 is something that actually regulatory services will work directly with Habitat for Humanity, and that's something that they can contract with very quickly to work in partnership there. The $1.5 million is proposed to assist homeowners who are at risk of foreclosure, and this is something that was proposed to us through the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. To again, they have a list of folks that they've been working with. They will advertise and get the word out that there will be more opportunities there. But it's really an opportunity for people who really can't sustain long-term being in their home, and the Land Trust could be a really important partner. There is another is Heritage Park Emergency Stabilization Support. This is public housing and tax credit housing located in the Heritage Park neighborhood that there are some very significant physical needs at this property that is jeopardizing the stability of the renters who are living there. And so this would be an emergency grant, $375,000 that we could get deployed very, very quickly. $1 million is proposed for housing stabilization. This is land trust and perpetual affordable housing models. And again, you're gonna hear this a lot as I run through these individual proposals. A lot of partnerships because capacity was, as many of you have heard from me many times, at the forefront of our concerns as well. So we really wanted to make sure that we were relying where we could on capacity of community partners. So this $1 million is proposed to work with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, and the proposal there is to work with existing Minneapolis renters who are low income, and to help them, provide resources to them to go out and purchase homes on their own. And then they would partner with the land trust, and the home would be selected by the home buyer, but then would then become part of the land trust perpetual affordable model. We're proposing $2 million in the Noaa Preservation Fund, and these funds, we have existing programs, the Noaa Preservation Fund and the Small Medium Multifamily Program. Our goal there would be to get the word out to our renter advocate partners and our other partners in preservation, to make sure that they're aware that the city has funds, if this is approved, available for targeted preservation efforts. We're proposing $2 million in low-income home repairs maintenance. Again, this would be adding to existing programs that we have that are oversubscribed, that we're actually not even marketing to low-income homeowners right now, because we don't have sufficient resources to help all of those who we know have needs for home improvements to their home. And again, these are focused heavily on safety, health, and livability and in environmental efficiency type improvements. And so the $2 million there, what we would do is we would just market this program, and we feel like we have sufficient staffing to move forward with that. The second category is homelessness response. That's about $6 million of the $28 million. The encampment response of $1 million is just, you know, we are incurring a lot of costs related to the existing encampments in the city, and we want to make sure that we have sufficient resources so that we can provide the necessary services to unsheltered persons who are residing at encampments, and also if there are specific interventions that we can do to help move people more directly into shelter or housing, we are want to make sure that we have resources to do that. Another $500,000 is proposed for a homelessness response flexible fund. We would propose to solicit proposals from community organizations and make that available more widely to, again, ask folks to come forward and bring proposals to us, say that we are willing to partner and to provide funding for innovative responses to homelessness needs. Some of the most successful models that we've been able to actually get implemented in the last year during this COVID response came from community organizations that came forward and proposed new models like Avivo Village and like Homeward Bound. And so we want to continue to encourage our community partners and community members to come forward and approach us with ideas that they have. Another $2.5 million is proposed for supportive housing for persons experiencing homelessness. We have heard from some of our homeless providers that they are exploring opportunities to move very immediately to acquire property, rehab property, and make it available for people who are currently in shelter or unsheltered situations, and move them into a permanent housing solution. And so again, that would be the $2.5 million would be a solicitation where we would see what proposals are out there. Finally, there's $2 million proposed for a women's shelter. Now, this is related to federal emergency solutions grant funds that were awarded during the COVID pandemic to the city. We've already, the city has already committed some of that funding for rehabilitation for a women's shelter. This is the same women's shelter. This is the shelter that the county, working with Salvation Army, has been looking to locate and invest in. This is a really critical part of our overall homelessness response system to making sure that we have sufficient capacity for women's shelter. So again, we know Hennepin County is actively looking for a site right now, and we expect those funds would be used within definitely in 2021. The third area is reducing racial disparities in homeownership, just about $4.5 million for that. And I'm not going to go through all of these individual proposals, although I'd like to highlight a couple of them, but these are all proposals that are before us right now. So as we've been before you before, and this council has approved really extensive changes to our Minneapolis Homes program to target that our homeownership assistance to lower income households, to target to more Black, Indigenous, people of color households, and to really ensure that we are eliminating racial disparities in homeownership. And so we have way more proposals that, in the current Minneapolis Homes round, and the majority of which are for perpetually affordable housing, some of which are in missing middle type affordable homeownership housing. So what we're proposing is that another 2.4 million be added to the Minneapolis Homes missing middle budget, so that we can just go ahead and fund these proposals that are in front of us right now, so that those projects can get underway and we can bring more deeply, not deeply, but affordable homes for current Minneapolis renters. Another thing I want to highlight, this is something that's a little bit more of seed money, but we are also proposing something very new and innovative here in partnership with Build Wealth Minnesota. Build Wealth Minnesota is proposing to create a first mortgage equity fund that will do manual underwriting. We know that one of the barriers to particularly Black and African American households attaining homeownership is has to do with barriers related to mortgage lending, and Build Wealth has done a tremendous amount of work in identifying the mortgage products that are really needed in the community. And so this will be a $500 million, or I'm sorry, a $500,000 grant to Build Wealth, and it would be contingent on them leveraging those funds by raising another $2 million so that they can create this significant first mortgage equity loan fund. But the timing is really critical. In order for them to leverage these additional funds, we do have to make the investment now. But that is the one piece on the reducing racial disparities in homeownership that we probably won't spend immediately, but we would need to commit immediately in order to ensure that that works. And then the fourth area is to really promote new low barrier housing models. So one is a $5 million fund that could be used for low barrier single room occupancy, SRO pilots. And what we want to do there is we want to partner with the county, who's also allocated some funding for SRO housing, and do a coordinated request for proposals so that we can try to, again, we're trying to shift culture in our development community, in our affordable housing community. And so we really want to signal that the city is working on this ordinance that would essentially legalize SROs throughout the city. So this is really signaling to the development community that we need to see proposals. We need to get these online as soon as possible, because getting more SROs in place as quickly as we can is a really critical part of our strategy to prevent and end homelessness. Also in this category is $1.2 million for the Envision pilot. Envision is a intentional community like cluster development that is that has been envisioned by people who have lived experience being homeless. And this development, this proposal has been in the works for a number of years now. This is a moment, this opportunity to provide funding to them is actually the catalyst that could get them this development started in 2021. So we're really excited about the possibility of American Rescue Plan Act funding actually being able to get this project finally started, because again, this is another model that could be replicated and could be a really important part of our homelessness response system. And then finally, the last piece is $4.6 million to fund MPHA. And again, the timing is really critical. The start of this development won't happen until 2022, but this project is really important because it will create family units, deeply affordable public housing family units, 84 of them, all a minimum of 2-bedroom units, a lot of them 3-bedroom units that will be developed in all parts of the city, so throughout the city. And we think this is a tremendous opportunity to build on the new regulation under Minneapolis 2040 to allow more of that missing middle type housing and create more deeply affordable rental housing for families that we know are in desperate need of it. So I hope I didn't speak too long, but I'm happy to answer any further questions about this. As it relates to capacity, I will say that the FTEs that are requested for CPAD to implement these are absolutely critically needed, as well as unfreezing positions as soon as possible. Happy to stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Brennan. I believe Councilmember Schrader has a few more follow-up questions.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Ellison. And thank you, Director Brennan. That was a really good overview of the whole thing. I did want to follow up kind of on the capacity issue. And just even, I hear you very loud and clear that you very much need those. But I did want to just even pose the question if that will be enough. And just to really make sure that we have the capacity in CPAD, and also tie that to another issue we keep hearing from our community partners as well. We've heard pretty consistently from community partners just kind of a lack of transparency around like how long it takes to implement and develop different policies at the city. To give you some examples, like just the work your staff did around the Envision with myself and the other authors was phenomenal, and just how quickly and how thoroughly that was done, compared also with like right now working on a Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act. There's a lot of frustrated community partners that this has been taking a long time, and one of the arguments they say is that, you know, they do this same work and would be able to push this forward. So as we're kind of implementing, like as you're implementing new employees and really pushing through a lot of these programs, I did also want to kind of add the point of if there's another way to add transparency around kind of the staff time and kind of how that is happening. And one of the community partners actually asked if we have some kind of a software that tracks time. So is just, I'm not suggesting that. What I am just suggesting is as we kind of implement these dollars, really finding a way to be more transparent with our community partners about how things work differently compared with, you know, like an SRO, which is something that is very similar to other programs we have, compared with, you know, Tenant Opportunity Purchase, which is a little bit more of a differential, like a change from how we normally do things. And just to be able to explain that to, you know, our community partners that we rely so much on.
I can respond to that briefly. Chair Ellison and Councilmember Schrader, I really can't, I don't think I can emphasize enough how much our capacity has been strained in the last year. And yes, I continue to be very concerned about the health and well-being of our entire team, because a lot has been asked of us, and I think that we have delivered a tremendous amount in the last year under extremely challenging circumstances. And you know, we have been balancing all year the need to identify what are the most urgent needs of our community and how can we best pivot and change what we're doing to respond to the highest priority needs that our residents and our businesses really need us to be there for them to do. And so there is a lot that has been put on hold. There is a lot of work that has slowed down and been on hold as we have been working basically for more than a year on emergency response. I mean, we've started in April of last year working on emergency forgivable loan programs for businesses, emergency rental assistance for residents, and homelessness response, and all of that. And it's continued, frankly, without a break. And we absolutely try to be as transparent as we can be. There is, and one of the ways that we try to do that is to make sure that we're communicating out all of this new work that we have shifted to. So we've we've been trying to make sure that we're updating our website to make sure that we're communicating with the public and with our really important community stakeholders that this is the work that we're doing right now. And you know, if this is not, if we're not working on the highest priority work, then by all means, I mean, we we want to hear that and pivot to the most high priority work, because that is the mindset, and that is how we have essentially operationalized our department in the last year to make sure that that's what we're able to do.
Thank you, Director Brennan. I think that's really helpful. I think just to frame the question a different way, or maybe my comment a different way. When I first came in, I talked to you about doing just kind of a shift in how CPED had done a lot of its housing programs. Like there was a lot of really great work being done, but it wasn't really tracked the same way it is now. And you came forward with that amazing report, I think it was just about a year and a half ago, that really showed like, here's what we're doing on every income level. And it just really helped policy-wise to make sure that we're hitting every part of the city, and really be able to chart a path to actually end homelessness, and make sure that everyone does have a home. And I guess I'm basically asking for something very similar. Like, how do we, if there is a change that needs to happen, to be more transparent to our community partners? Because I mean, the reason they're asking is because they want to be helpful. They have some capacity. They see how hard the city is working to get to the same goal they are, and they want to be able to help. And so, just if there is some opportunity with these new funds, and as we expand to really do that work, I would be happy to be helpful.
3 years progress report, including 2020, and that will include a lot of this pivoting that we did in 2020. So that is something we're really excited to make sure that we're getting out there. Again, just to make sure that we're being transparent about the work and what we're doing and why we're doing it. Secondly, as it relates particularly to the tenant opportunity to purchase policy that you mentioned, we are planning to meet with the many stakeholders and advocates to hear from them, to talk with them, to share that with them the work that we've started doing on that policy. And I believe that meeting is scheduled, and if it isn't scheduled, it will be still in June. We have hired a consultant. We have started working on that policy, and fully intend to meet and share that progress with stakeholders on that front. And yes, I also think that it's important for us to understand what those community stakeholder needs are, and I think we should continue to have discussions with them about as we continue to identify the highest priority needs for future rounds of the American Rescue Plan Act. And I absolutely welcome the opportunity to have those discussions.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schrader. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be speaking to the public safety related investments. And so there's a couple of points that I want to make, and a question towards the end. So there's something that I just want to make sure that we pull apart and think through. And I don't think, I want to be clear, I don't think it's malicious or anything. I just want to make sure that we're consciously understanding that when there is under the proposals, that under police related investments, each one of them has the following passage, which is many of these historic crime trends are centered around young adults and juveniles. The pandemic has exacerbated many of the problems that had a significant impact on this age group. Recent statistics show that just under 2/3 of 18 to 24-year-olds exhibit signs of a wide range of mental health issues, and then goes on to connect that to why we need more police and expand the capacity in MPD. And so I just want to be bring to the forefront of our consciousness of we know that more policing is not going to address the underlying mental health issues. And as I am looking here, we are going to have an increase. What's proposed here is 2 more mental health professionals in the school-based clinics, which is for high school students. So if 67% of 18 to 24-year-olds are exhibiting a wide range of mental health disorders, we don't have within this how we're actually addressing that and it's connected to increasing the capacity of policing. So when we talk about building out comprehensive systems, I just want, like, this is the point that we're trying to make, is that we cannot keep turning to policing to solve these underlying issues. And if we want to be able to actually solve these persistent issues that we're dealing with, then we have to be thinking more comprehensively. We do have some really great work. So I just want to be clear, like, we do have some really great work here that I, like I said, I'm excited about. I just want to make sure that we're pulling that out and being aware of the connection that's being made between mental health issues and increasing policing. I also want to just state that we're looking at increases. So civilianization would be for support for administrative purposes, or that would be for that, and it would allow officers to concentrate on law enforcement in all bureaus. Then contracting with law enforcement agencies for investigators and also patrols. And so one of the things that I just want, and then there's the violent crime hotspot task force, which I'm intrigued to eventually hopefully learn more about what that actual task force looks like. But one of the things that has been a concern around that I've had is that I understand, obviously, that we need to be able to have enough capacity in MPD to do law enforcement work. That's, I would assume, a general consensus. At the same time, research that was conducted or adapted by the National Research Council in 2003, based on their work related to fairness and effectiveness in policing, the evidence, and the research was led by a committee to review research on police policy and practice. According to them, in effectiveness of policing strategies, the standard model of adding more police, general patrol, rapid response, follow-up investigation, and undifferentiated arrest for domestic violence has little to no evidence of effectiveness. Now, obviously, we need to have people responding to 911 calls, and we need to be able to have meaningful investigations. But the way that we are doing business and have been doing business by legitimate researchers in criminology and crime science have said that this standard model has little or no evidence of effectiveness in lowering crime and violence. Whereas if we move to more focused policing and problem-oriented policing, that actually has moderate to strong evidence. So, I'm excited, like I said, and interested in seeing more about the violent crime hotspot task force, because there's very strong evidence of effectiveness in problem solving in hotspots. Now, with that being said, that is not having officers sitting together by themselves in a room coming up with strategies and then going and implementing it. Problem-oriented policing is bringing together all sorts of different stakeholders. We're trying to do this, for example, on the corner of Logan and Lowry. We brought together community-based agencies that work with folks who are being sex trafficked, folks struggling with chemical substance abuse disorders, working with folks who deal with helping folks with coordinated entry so that they can begin the process of getting out of homelessness. And then the neighborhood organization to connect with neighbors. That would be a great place for MPD, for something like a violent crime hotspot task force, to plug into that, because we need the enforcement aspect of it for this whole problem solving to work. We need that aspect, but we unfortunately haven't been able to really get that sort of targeted support. We're still out there, we're still trying to do the work, but that's what problem-oriented policing is. It's not just saying we're gonna add more capacity to just do more of the same thing that we're doing, because it hasn't been effective. And just adding more police, doing more general patrol is not going to change outcomes. I will also add around focused policing is, as we are getting, as we are looking to go with partner agencies to contract with local law enforcement agencies for patrol. Again, it's like general patrol is, I mean, there have been experiments done in other cities, and it's not effective. In Minneapolis, there actually was a study around intensive, focused, intensive enforcement and hotspot patrols, and those did show some effectiveness. And so I guess my point being, it is important for us to make sure that we have enough capacity in Minneapolis Police Department to be able to do law enforcement work. What I want us to not do is to just keep putting resources and building out the capacity to do the same things that we've been doing, which have not been effective. We use the numbers of what has happened over the last couple of years because it's happened citywide. But what we had in North Minneapolis prior to a couple of years ago, or starting last year, for example, between 2020 and 2021 is the 2 years I'm speaking of, what we had wasn't working. It was just tolerated. And so I want us to start thinking as a city around how are we allocating our police resources in more effective ways, rather than just building the capacity to do the same exact things that we've been doing, hoping to get different outcomes. So I wanna share that analysis and perspective, and like, don't want folks to like walk away from here saying that I'm trying to abolish the police. No, what I'm saying is that we need to be allocating our resources in more effective, evidence-based ways. And then the question that I have is, I think I should direct this probably to Commissioner Musicant. For the Youth and Safety Fund, how is that different from the Office of Violence Prevention Fund, if at all?
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. I just forgot how to activate my system there for a second. Your question was about the
The Youth and Community Safety Fund.
There you go. Thank you. I couldn't come up with the words. That is really a combination of approaches that we are going to oversee a larger RFP around. And so there will be youth and safety issues that the community members can address, but also some other issues. And so it's a mechanism to get some of this money into the community quickly. And yes, it will complement our work on youth violence prevention for sure, but it will also help us work with community members who have additional ideas for what the community well-being needs.
So yes, I understand that, but that's what the Violence Prevention Fund does. So that's why I'm asking, like, are these like the same thing by different names, or because the Violence Prevention Fund goes towards community-based groups that are doing either youth violence prevention or just more broadly violence prevention efforts in the community. And so so I guess I'm just curious, like, because what you just described is essentially the Violence Prevention Fund. So I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, is this money supposed to be going into that, or are we creating, like, replicating what we already have in the Violence Prevention Fund?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, it will really amplify what's possible in that area, as well as addressing other areas. So it we'll be tapping into the knowledge of staff to know what has already been funded through that other mechanism, and then building on that. So hopefully that partially addresses your question.
When you say and addresses other areas, like what other areas would that be?
Well, I know that Noaa Woodridge is on as well today, and she was most closely involved in writing this proposal. So I'm going to see if she can give us a little more clarity on that.
Thank you.
Sure, Councilmember Cunningham and Gretchen. This particular pot of money, a portion or a segment of it is dedicated to youth-oriented prevention services. But it's actually the RFP process that we will develop and implement in order to distribute this dollars includes 2 to 3 pots of money that will all be distributed through the same RFP process. I mean, in the health department, we are in a fortunate position where we have a fair amount of money coming in that we want to get back out the door. And if we did an RFP process for each of the pots of money, we'd be doing 10 RFP processes. So we're trying to combine these into one pot. So when when Gretchen says other issues, we're looking also at our opioid work, our homelessness work, potentially some of our mental health bodies of work, perhaps some of our maternal and child health. So it's really an opportunity to pull together several pots of money, including this youth prevention focus, and to do a single RFP. There will be several people in the health department as well as representation from the youth coordinating board to help design this particular RFP process. And and I would say with the youth prevention work, it's perhaps broadening the scope a bit to include other issues that don't strictly fall within a public safety umbrella.
Great, got it. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. That's it for my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Cunningham. Commissioner Musicant, I see that you had wrote something in the chat about Patrick Hanlon's work, and I was just wondering if you maybe wanted to speak on it for a moment or two.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the question was raised about staff capacity, I believe, related to the increase in the Green Cross Share program. And as we conceptualized this, we did ask for some additional administrative staff support and also support for some staffing and regulatory services that would help reach multi-family units, which is really an area where we have had many projects, and we think that the potential for more is high. And we know that the contribution to climate change from large buildings is significant, and so we think that that's really an important focus area. But yes, we will need some additional staff support in order to carry it out.
All right, thank you so much. And I see in the queue we have Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I want to start with just a little bit of a just big picture comment that I'm a little disappointed by the level of detail that we're being provided. And I know that there's more detail that was provided to us very recently that most of us haven't had a chance to digest, that I hope will be made available to the public. Because what I'm concerned about is we're a week away from a public hearing. That's the one opportunity for the public to comment on these ARP funds. This is a lot of money, and I'm not sure that people have enough information to tell us whether we're on the right track or not. So I just want to be clear up front that I'm concerned, and I think we have a lot of work to do to get enough information out to people that they can authentically respond to this. That being said, I want to start with some sort of just big picture thoughts about this and ask a couple of questions that can hopefully get us to a place where we can start to drill down into the details. But let's just kind of start with just some big picture goals. I think, if I was sort of thinking about where we want to really try to intervene with ARP, it makes sense to me that we would really focus on housing and especially on sheltered homelessness. And there's proposals that do that, which is great. What could you do with more resources? And everybody brought the programs that we already have, because that's what we're able to do and that's what we're sort of prepared to do. And that doesn't necessarily ask the question, is that actually the most responsive thing to the pandemic and the harm that it caused? And so I want to just make sure that we're asking questions about, is this actually responsive to the need and the moment? And what's our analysis that tells us that this is the right investment to be making? And is this something that is an urgent response? Because we're doing a process that frankly is not as transparent to the public as I would like. I don't think that the public does have as much information as I would like them to have. And so there needs to be urgency to justify us including it in phase one, as opposed to pushing it to phase two, where we have time to ask more questions and get more information. And so I want to just sort of establish that as a big picture framing for how I'm thinking about this work. And I will just kind of follow up on Councilmember Cunningham's question first, since that's where we just were. Let's stick with that for a second. One of the things that I wonder about that expanding scope is I was just in a meeting on downtown safety earlier, where we heard, for example, from YouthLink that they're interested in providing programming at night. I know that that's something that hasn't been a fit for the violence prevention framework in the way that they frame up their work. Is this something where the expansion of scope might create opportunity for people who are doing programming that is not necessarily violence prevention, strictly speaking, but that is certainly preventative in terms of giving youth positive activities, giving people places to direct their energy and places to be that are safe. I'm hopeful that we can see that expansion of scope, and I wonder if you can just talk a little bit more about whether you think things like a lot of the programming that the Youth Coordinating Board does through the schools, through the parks, through partners like YouthLink, might be included in that expansion of scope.
Councilmember Fletcher, Noaa again. Yes, I mean, I will say, I appreciate your wanting more detail. I also appreciate having the opportunity to get these large chunks of money. We didn't have a ton of time to put a ton of detail to it. But that's, that's what we will be doing, and we'll be working with all of our internal and external partners to help create a process that really responds to the needs of the community. And I think just in a brief email conversation that I had with Anne from Youth Coordinating Board, she's like, we really want to make sure that like after school programming is reflected in this opportunity. And so it's things like that as an example. Another example is in our opioid response, we are currently, we just recently issued an RFP to do youth-oriented prevention work for opioids. Now, opioid overdoses in the last 18 months have doubled and nearly tripled from 2019. And we are doing a fair amount as a city to try to mitigate that particular issue. What we're not doing is preventing people from ever using opioids to begin with. And so I envision some portion of this money being made available to do substance use prevention services, which isn't squarely a public safety issue, but is certainly related to. And so in having conversations with our community partners, those conversations will inform the RFP that eventually gets issued and people will be able to respond to in order to get some portion of the dollars that are being made available.
That's great, thank you. I see the Councilmember Schrader wants to stick on this topic, and I was going to move on to something else, so maybe I'll yield to him if you'll call on me when he's done.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you. No, I just thank you, Ms. Woodridge. I appreciate you looking at what the need is right now, but did also have a question about just how much you're communicating with the county. I know that this is also they're looking at the opioid overdoses and also seeing a real need to spend some of their dollars on that. So just wanted to make sure that we're, well, I'd actually like to learn a little bit more about how we're coordinating with the county.
Sure, Councilmember Schrader. My opioid team actually meets with the person that's in charge of the opioid response for the county on a monthly basis to have conversations about what is going on. They recently did approach us to ask some questions about the hospital-based program that we have operating at Hennepin Health. And they were interested in implementing such a program. So we are having conversations with them about, well, perhaps you could take over the program at Hennepin Health and we can use our money to go to Fairview Riverside. Or perhaps we stay at Hennepin Health and you use your money to go to Fairview Riverside or North Memorial. So we do have regular conversations with both the county and the state about kind of the collective body of work that is being done around the opioid issue. And then certainly regular weekly, if not daily, conversations with the community about how this issue is impacting them.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Great. Councilmember, oh, I see. I want to call on Councilmember Fletcher, but I see that Commissioner Musicant has put herself in the queue, and I just want to see if it's still to speak directly to the topic we're on. Commissioner Musicant.
There, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to add one more piece to the discussion about this fund, and that is a reminder of our SREAP public safety priority, and that has been identified as really the beefing up the dearth of youth programming that there is across our city, and that really since 2003 there's been a dramatic decrease in funding from so many different sources for programming for young people. And so if we look at where that fund will focus, that is clearly an area that we have identified, that positive youth development programming and its connection to public safety is documented in the city council and the city's choice of that as a priority approach to public safety.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I want to turn now to a lot of the CPED items. So if Director Brennan's still available, I think the first question is just, I think there's a lot that I really like in here and that I want to lift up in the ways that we're really leaning into transitional housing and transitions out of homelessness. I think it's very, very important that we take the housing crisis that we're in very seriously, and that is something that was directly exacerbated by the pandemic in a way that we should absolutely be using ARP funds to work on. And so I just want to make sure that we're doing enough. I think we don't necessarily have visibility to all of the partner commitments that we're getting. I know that we are not the only agency or even the primary agency that addresses unsheltered homelessness. Hennepin County is doing very important work. And I guess my question is, if we have this sort of unprecedented opportunity of these recovery funds, these Rescue Act dollars landing at this level, are we doing enough? Is this enough that we won't see encampments? do we have an analysis about the scale of the problem this summer, and are we meeting it? Because we actually have resources. We can see there is enough. We should be looking at how are we getting people housed, and I just want to make sure that we're not falling short of the need that we know is out there.
Chair Ellison, Councilmember Fletcher, that is a really excellent question, and one I wish I could answer completely and definitively. What I will say is that we were looking, I think Director Krueger went through at the beginning sort of the parameters for how we're approaching this first round of funding. And we really were looking for opportunities that we could move on very quickly, and opportunities that we knew we could, really important to signal and to seed, like the single room occupancy, low barrier housing models, envision, that type of thing. With homelessness response, I think that, we want to make sure also that we're leveraging, these are federal resources that are coming directly to the city. But we're also wanting to make sure that we're leveraging those in ways that bring other partners to the funding table as well. And so some of the proposals here, the 2.5 million for permanent supportive housing, that was intended to be, we're hopeful that that's something that we can, that the county could potentially match and provide, either their American Rescue Plan Act funds or other funds to help, partner with us and so that our funds can go farther and we can do more. The $2 million investment in the women's shelter is an example of that partnership, where that still sort of respects the traditional lines where, the city has invested a lot in capital investment in our homelessness response system and the actual physical infrastructure of shelters and housing. And the county is committing over $1 million of ongoing operating funding out into the future. And so those are the kinds of partnerships that I think we were really trying to see if we can, what is available now, what's on the table now that we can move on. And these funds do present a tremendous opportunity to move on things that we just were kind of stuck with before. So I think that is part of our thinking. We will be thinking a lot more about, other initiatives, and we hope that some of these some of these solicitations that we want to do, again, for, creative, flexible responses to homelessness and the permanent supportive housing, we're hoping we get interest in what we start hearing are, new ideas, new proposals of ways that we can creatively respond. And then what we would do is follow up with and propose that perhaps in the second round of American Rescue Plan Act. So we really were thinking about, what do we have the capacity to jump in and do right now? We don't have the capacity. And when I say we, I don't mean just city staff. I mean our entire homelessness response system. So what we hear time and time again from the shelter operators and our outreach teams and other stakeholders who are really critical in helping to respond to and homelessness is they have really limited capacity. And so we also, if we were to ask for, $5 million for a brand new shelter here, I don't know how helpful it would be in this moment in time, because I don't know who has the capacity to operate that. So these are the kinds of things that we have to build over time. And as of, so far this summer, there haven't been, if there have, there been very few and far between where anyone has been turned away from shelter. One of the proposals that proposals that is really high on our radar, in terms of, again, looking at the the overall homelessness response system that we have and ways that we can strengthen it, not just to meet the immediate crisis at hand, but to ensure that we have a robust system that helps us far into the future. And one of the things that's on our radar is, significant capital needs at Harbor Lights. Not just, to address maintenance issues, but to make that shelter a much more livable, friendly, culturally appropriate experience for people who are staying there. And so there definitely are, I think, additional investments that we can consider to strengthen our homelessness response system. But this is what we could propose at this moment in time, given our current level of capacity in the system.
Thanks for that. I think I wondered if in the flex spending category, if we need to have some kind of a reserve. It feels like 3 years in a row now we start having sort of panicky and increasingly panicky conversations in late August going into September about what's going to happen when it gets cold, as more people have started camping. And I kind of just want to make sure that we're planning ahead to not be sort of under-resourced and resources in some specific ways to make sure that if we are not confident that we are really meeting everybody's need, that we are confident in our understanding that we're going to be responsible for an emergency response for whatever need we aren't able to meet, and we need to make sure we have resources for that too. So let's continue that conversation. But I think as much as possible, if there are ways that we can build on this proposal or improve on this proposal to really make sure that we are addressing the crisis of unsheltered homelessness, I think there's a lot of interest for that on the council. I have several questions, so if any of my colleagues are wanting to jump in, I'm happy to yield, but I'll keep going if not. Moving to economic development. That's the other area that I think is obviously really important. I think that there are several, really important needs there. I guess I'm wondering, for some of the sort of jobs programs and training programs, can you talk a little bit about what's the analysis about what's happening in the economy right now? How do we know we're training people for the right things, given how much everything changed and how things are kind of coming back on? How do we land on these programs as the right ones to invest in?
Chair Ellison, Councilmember Fletcher, that's a really great question. I know Eric Hansen, Director of Economic Policy and Development, is also on this call, and so I'd defer to him to jump in and answer some of these questions. He can provide a little bit more detail than I can. And if he's not for some reason, I will jump in.
I'm here, Andrea. Chair Ellison and Councilmember Fletcher. It was a very tough year for people in Minneapolis from the employment standpoint. We had about 140,000 people apply for unemployment benefits in 2020, and as Amelia stated earlier in her remarks, it wasn't. It hit other people harder than based on economic class and race than others. And so we saw higher unemployment and underemployment rates, Black and Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, indigenous immigrant populations than we did with whites. And the programs that we have here are working with our established workforce development system, which is a pretty robust partner-driven system and one of the best in the country. We have a very strong team of staff that look at both youth and adult programs, but we also have a really strong network of community-based providers. And one of the things we noticed in what we're proposing now is while there is a robust system of supports for people to find career work. That's also not known universally. And so the ambassador program that's proposed here is actually kind of the proverbial boots on the ground and breaking down some barriers for people that have no clue that there are resources out there, and to go to where the people are. This is identified in many community conversations, both throughout the city, that it's good to have a workforce center in the South and a workforce center in North, but if you don't know it's there, you don't know what services are there, and you don't know all of the wonderful providers we have, like the Urban League or Hired or the others, you're not going to get the jobs that are out there. And there's an enormous amount of job openings in the country right now, and so we are seeing businesses rebounding. But we still have this unemployment gap, and it's been a structural issue in the workforce system for as long as I've been paying attention to the workforce system. So that's one of the main programs, is that ambassador program, is to break down that barrier. Another one we've seen is it's hard to participate in the workforce development program if you don't have a resume. And so the Minnesota Works program is a transitional work program that was presented to us earlier in this process, that helps people who have had spotty or no work history start to build skills and a resume so that they can participate. One of the biggest programs in helping people get back to work is the Dislocated Worker Program, that doesn't apply to many people, especially there's a real race divide between who participates in that program and who doesn't, because in order to participate in the Dislocated Worker Program, you have to have that resume. So this transitional program, we think, also breaks down that barrier when you see that historic unemployment and underemployment rate, especially in the Black community in Minneapolis. And then the third program that we have is just increasing our career laddering programs and the green industry, which is emerging, as it always has been. There's also a program in the health department around green skill building, but that was an identified career track program that we just don't have a lot of resources in. We have a number of other programs that help people find family supporting, wage earning, career laddering positions, but the green industry, we just do not have the infrastructure, and we think that this is the time with this opportunity to increase that service. So those are the three programs that you see within that economic development budget and how we got to proposing them. And then from a capacity standpoint, we think that we can get this deployed. The budget the budget office, when they talk to us about this, they want us to get this money out in 2021 as much as possible, and maybe it caroms into 22, but this is really like, how can we really get things moving? And people are hurting out there, and we think these programs will be targeted to at least address that hurt that's out there. Does that answer your question, Councilmember?
It does. Thank you.
I see Councilmember Palmisano just had a clarifying question. Councilmember, Eric, you can either see it written in the chat, or Councilmember Palmisano, you can maybe ask.
So
yeah, Councilmember Ellison, I guess I'm supposed to speak to make sure that I'm noted as being here for this meeting too. Just wanted to clarify, I think I remember similar information last year, but because some of this information gets more accurate over time, as there's more distance away from it, could you clarify, it is 140,000 people in our city sought unemployment benefits in 2020?
Councilmember Ellison and Councilmember Palmisano, to be more precise, 144,000 people that live in Minneapolis filed for unemployment insurance in 2020. And there is likely some duplicative applications in that number, but it's still a staggering number for a city of roughly over 400,000 people for 1 year. So it was a remarkable year for unemployment in Minneapolis. And I also want to say that those are people who filed. This doesn't count. This undercounts people's hardship. Because if you're underemployed in a job that is, not, paying a family supporting wage, you're not counted in that number. And if you were just not participating in the workforce, you're not counting in that number for unemployment. So that's just one data statistic to show the impact. And another thing that I think we would think about is when the pandemic unemployment insurance top off dropped in August in Minneapolis, that equaled $25 million each week in income going into families in Minneapolis. So there's, even though people have been getting unemployment insurance, it depends on what time of year you were getting that insurance, on how much you were receiving. So that was a $600 a week. Now there's a $300 a week top off from the federal government, but it's still not enough for many families to stay above the poverty line.
Thank you. If I may, Councilmember Cunningham, do we have any of this data yet for 2021? And if what I've just heard anecdotally is that people who use EBT cards regularly, food stamps classically, that they've received more of that benefit. Do we know if that's having, do we know, can we quantify that, I guess, as a whole? And then do we know if there are more unemployment benefits? Do we have any count of 2021 in terms of people continuing to seek unemployment?
Yeah, Chair Ellison, Councilmember Palmisano, I'm certain we have that data. I just don't have it on hand, but I can pull that for you and provide it to you soon.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. And I know that we sort of jumped in as Councilmember Fletcher was making his question, so I just want to make sure we go back and but I know that Councilmember Palmisano's question was on that specific topic, so that's why I wanted to let her jump in. But Councilmember Fletcher, please go ahead.
Thank you. The other big investment in economic development is reimbursing business licensing fees and other permitting fees. And the way that item was worded in the summary that we were sent was a little bit confusing, I think, about are we reimbursing ourselves for things that people didn't pay, or are we out of the Recovery Act money, or are businesses getting some relief or reimbursement to help them get back on their feet? So I just want to make sure that we understand sort of what that item is, and what fees are we targeting, what businesses are likely to benefit from this kind of an investment. Can you clarify that item for us?
Yeah. Chair Ellison, Councilmember Fletcher, that is a large fund. It's kind of an amalgamation of a few proposals we made to the mayor's office. With license fees for businesses, that basically is a rebate to businesses for paying fees this year. The way fees are structured, we can postpone the payment of the fees, but we can't waive them. And so what this is it's akin to paying for that service, but that fee then is a direct reduction in expenses to the business. That's one main component. There's also built in that fund some assistance for businesses that went out of business in the last year. They want to come back to reduce the fee that they would have to pay, and also their license fee. So it reduce that barrier for a business to restart, because that is a process, as you know. And then there's still to be worked out funding available for businesses that have been left out in other, like CARES Acts and some other groups, and those, we're probably going to have to get outsource that component of this with CDFI or another servicer, because we're thinking about maybe forgivable loans like we have done in the past with George Floyd Square, or the forgivable loans after the pandemic started last year. And we just, to the council president's point, we just don't have the capacity to maybe run an $8 million loan fund. So we'll be looking to our potentially community partners to do that. But those are still in the works. And again, this is a process that is, to your point about, the quickness of this. What we've heard, and I'm assuming everybody on the council's heard, people want to see this money go out fast. This is a very ambitious program for us as an economic development team. As Director Brennan said, this team has been working, essentially around the clock for 18 months straight, and they have been very flexible and very adaptive and very innovative on trying to meet the needs. And we are looking forward to this challenge because we know that the entrepreneurs in the city and the people who need skills need help now. So I don't know if we are, how successful we're going to be getting this money out as fast as we can, but we're going to try as hard as we can and use as many of our community partners as we can to get these funds into people's hands as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
And Council President Bender also has a few questions related to economic development.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. I wondered if, so I know our business community has been through an impossible year. I also wondered if we have thought about ways to leverage these investments in ways that meet multiple goals. And so specifically, if we're investing anything that finances the construction of new buildings, is there a way to leverage that to ensure that workers are protected from wage theft and human trafficking and ongoing issues that are already illegal, and or additional protections for workers? If we're investing in businesses, is there a way to leverage those funds to ensure that we're encouraging policies or practices that support the workers who've also been through such a challenging year? On the housing side, are we able to leverage funds that may support landlords who, again, need support to protect the renters who are in their buildings? So it's kind of a general question from a policy approach, and then I would be interested to follow up on any details in the particular investment categories. Thank you.
I'll take the worker protection program, and then I'll look to Andrea for the renter supports. But Chair Ellison and Council President Bender, we work closely with the Department of Civil Rights. We take wage theft really seriously. The challenge is uncovering it. We do not expect that our investments from a city is going to go into a place where they're exploiting the workers who are doing the work. And so when we talk with the Civil Rights Department, we follow their lead and get their advice on what we should do to make sure that we have that. We have typically things in place around prevailing wage and in some cases Davis-Bacon if it's federally funded. So there is a little bit of added documentation about wages, but it is a game that there are a number of community groups that are watching this, labor unions, of course, and we've been meeting with them throughout the pandemic about this issue, so it's not been lost. And when we know something, we do something about it. So I don't know how much more we can do aside from deploying additional resources to monitor, which we don't have at this moment in time, but we're not expecting and we're not expecting that we'll see wage theft, but again, it is something you have to be vigilant about. Andrea.
Sure, Chair Ellison, Council President Bender, I can chime in and just say that absolutely we were thinking about multiple goals in all of the proposals that we submitted to the mayor's office. And just a couple of examples are, some of the some of the examples around reducing, for example, racial disparities in homeownership. That is, thinking about, first of all, like just totally new ways of doing things than what we've done before. So having a combination of being able to just like move really quickly under Minneapolis homes, but then really test out and support the major changes that were made in this program. And part of the sort of multiple goal thing is that increasingly we are trying to ensure that our investments are not just in ensuring that the sort of the person who purchases the home or the person who achieves stability in rental housing, that they are benefited, but that we're building like broader infrastructure that really supports community organizations and supports community members. And so a lot of what we were thinking about is just making sure that we're doing that. And another example is, so the Build Wealth partnership example is one of them. Again, bringing more creativity, bringing more new innovative investments to the table to help us really break this barrier that we really, frankly, haven't been able to break in the past. So again, like thinking of something like a first mortgage equity fund, that is not something we've done before, not just as the city of Minneapolis, but as a community. So thinking about making sure we're supporting that innovation that is coming from community organizations and community members, and doing that in a way that really builds capacity. Another example is the missing middle the missing middle public housing proposal that we're supporting. That is that hits on so many multiple goals. One of the things that they are doing in their construction methodology is they're actually using modular construction. And so the importance of that is that they are going to be able to actually build those housing units so much faster because of the type of construction methodology that they're using. And this is also something that we want to try to strengthen, as an industry, because we haven't been successful in the past in limiting the growth of construction costs and the amount of subsidy that's needed to support affordable housing. So that's an example of preserving existing public housing, significantly expanding permanent, deeply affordable housing for families with incomes well below 30% AMI. Having them be really focused on environmental sustainability as well, hitting the city's Minneapolis 2040 goals to add density throughout the city, so they're more missing middle type housing construction, and then using the modular construction design to again really try to support a new construction methodology that can help get more housing done more quickly. So that's just an example, but I could probably give you similar examples for almost every one of our proposals for how we've been thinking in terms of multiple goals.
Did you have any more to add, Council President?
Thank you both. That was very helpful, and happy to follow up more in particular about the parts that go beyond CPED's own scope, especially with an eye to, are there things missing from this to have that robust package that we want to have in place? I did have a question in the chat. I don't think anyone else is in queue right now, so maybe I should just ask that now, Mr. Chair. Okay.
Yeah.
I did ask finance. This is back to public safety. I had done a back of the envelope calculation, but I just wanted to hear from finance the allocation for law enforcement and then the allocation for non-law enforcement public safety strategies. I think our calculations were slightly different, so maybe I'll just ask Finance if they can provide that information to us. And then I have one follow-up question or statement, I suppose.
Yep, thank you, Council President Bender. So for the public safety goal area, I would just using departments that are being appropriated these dollars. The police department is being appropriated 5.6 million of that goal area. And so the remainder 5.9 is going to other departments.
Thank you. And then I noted, I think my numbers didn't add up because I was doing it from my computer screen on a piece of paper. So appreciate that. And then I did just want to note that the proposal includes contracting with outside law enforcement agencies. We've had some of this conversation in the past. I have legitimate concerns about the kind of lines of the chain of command and liability questions and concerns when we contract with outside law enforcement. It's part of why I didn't support a previous ask to the council to approve a contract, which was approved by the council, but never, as I understand it, there was never any contract, even with the council approval. So, I mean, again, this can be something for follow-up. I will say I'm managing the fallout of in Uptown of the recent law enforcement killing of Winston Smith. And, you know, as in many other areas of issues, often it is the city or the city council member who is out there standing on the street trying to manage the fallout of problems that have been created by a lot of other agencies. And we're not getting a lot of information right now from the agencies that were involved in that in the situation that led to Mr. Smith's killing. And so I just want to say that I hope our constituents expect us to ask these questions. And I am hopeful that we will be able to get some answers to questions about what happens when we are contracting with outside law enforcement agencies. How does the chain of command work? Who is in charge? Who determines how those resources are allocated and used? What happens if there is a complaint around use of force or an incident related to use of force? And as much detail as possible, what the systems and protocols would be helpful. Thank you.
And I see that we have Councilmember Schrader for a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in addition to those questions from the council president, I think it bears asking the very basic question on if the department has reached out to these other law enforcement agencies. Last time that the council approved money to do this exact same thing, the police department had not reached out to Metro Transit or to the county, and we had approved money that was never spent. And so I just want to make sure that that has been taken care of, in addition to all the great questions from the council president, because it is something that if we're going to go forward, I want to make sure that that's there. And I don't know if there's anyone from MPD or the mayor's office that can answer that question now.
Mr. Chair, this is Robin McPherson. If I can speak, I'd be happy to answer some of the questions at least. So can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I
Please.
apologize. So a couple of things. So in 2020, we did ask for funds. We had some preliminary conversations. Unfortunately, there are concerns between all agencies these days with liability. And so within the short time period that we had to have that contract in place, we were not able to finalize the contract. So I apologize that happened. We had hoped it would go quicker than it did, and we just I think misunderstood the time frame on some of the requests and questions. There are actually two ways that we have, by the way, spoken with other agencies about this. We have not gone far because of course we don't have the funding to do this. Until that happens, it really can't go through any approval process at either agency. But there are two methods that we're looking at. One is where the officers would actually work for us and help us as almost a buyback situation, where they're working overtime and they're working under the direction of our officers. The other, which we think is probably a little bit more promising, is more of a JET concept, which we've had in the past. I think some of you have been around during those time periods, where we're actually having joint operations for specific types of events or law enforcement, that is actually addressing something very, very specific. And those are contracts where we pay the other agency, and that defrays their cost. The liability sits on each agency individually. Workers' comp always sits on the specific agency that is sending the employee, but the liability itself in a JET contract sits within the agency that is doing the work.
Ms. McPherson, real quick, if you're able, the tech team is wondering if you are able to turn on your camera while you're speaking.
I apologize. Yes.
No worries. Thank you. Councilmember Schrader, continue.
Oh yeah, thank you. No, and I appreciate that background. I think it's I will need, it'd be very helpful to have the answers to those questions as this money gets allocated. I just think back to the example, this council approved $500,000. It would be helpful to know, what happened to that money after it was approved, and then clearly wasn't spent. And then my second question, you talked a little bit about like where the liability is, but also just kind of it'd be good to know how Minneapolis policies would be enforced especially with the recent example of the elimination of no-knock warrants here in the city of Minneapolis, and then MPD using other law enforcement agencies to basically do a no-knock warrant. And so I think we want to be very clear, where I thought the press conference and everything was very clear, where we're no longer going to have no-knock warrants, and then we hear Anoka County SWAT was executing and actually executing a wrong no-knock warrant.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but I can't answer you from an operational standpoint, so I would be happy to get back with you. DC Halverson was on the phone earlier, on the meeting earlier. I think that he is not any longer. So I will get back with you and answer the specific questions to you.
So thank you, I appreciate it.
This is Chief Halverson. I am still on the call, so I can address some of those questions that you have.
Please go ahead.
I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. Were you going to add something else, or do you want me to respond to those?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So regarding the no-knock, I'm not aware of what issue or incident you're talking about, but these requests that we would have would be specifically towards patrol. They'd be assisting out with either one with the hotspots that we would identify, and we would have those funds allocated for those other agencies to be able to assist in responding to those hotspot locations, to respond to certain calls, to respond to incidents. I think with the information that's been out regarding our employees, that we are down a large percentage of our employees. So these people that we would ask to assist us would kind of backfill in some of those to be able to respond to specific incidents, to backfill to some of our resources to assist with that. As far as liability, as Director McPherson addressed, some of those liability issues would fall upon the individual agencies that would come to assist. The primary agencies we'd be asking for to assist would be Hennepin County, which we're in Hennepin County, so they would follow their policies, procedures, be able to follow their process of any liability issues, along with Metro Transit, which is kind of the same concept, same idea.
Thank you, Chief Albertson. And I'll put a link in the chat. There was a news story about the no-knock warrants.
Any additional follow-up, Councilmember Schrader? Okay. Great questions. I'm going to move on to Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. It feels like as we're having a budget conversation around policing, it's worth just sort of regrounding everybody in that we funded a force of nearly 750 officers, and that it is not cuts to the budget that resulted in us being significantly lower staffed. It is staff attrition and unexpected and unbudgeting such a reduced payroll. I know that for the first part of the year, many people were still on payroll as they were working through their retirement paperwork, their exit process, their disability settlements, et cetera. But a lot of people have come off the payroll now. And so we actually have a payroll cost that should be significantly lower than what we budgeted for. And so I guess my question is, if this is being presented as an urgent need, particularly the civilianization, sort of unfreezing positions that are authorized within MPD that seem like they would fit within the payroll that was funded. Why are we talking about ARP funds for this? Why are we waiting for the council to approve it on July 2nd? It just feels like this is something that MPD is authorized to do and has the budget for. And so I think we need some explanation, and we're going to need some help in understanding how there isn't money, because the way we're making up for the shortage of staffing is through overtime, which we budgeted abundantly for. And I know we're going to have a robust conversation about that tomorrow in the Public Health and Safety Committee, because we have a staffing reserve that we know MPD is going to come and access tomorrow for that purpose. And I'm skeptical that we can even fill the full capacity of overtime. I'm hearing that we're already not filling overtime slots that are budgeted because we are short-staffed, and so overtime is not an unlimited resource, right? And we're going to have challenges with that. And so and then we've funded full training programs. We know that the training is funded, so that's not something that comes out of that payroll. So we're going to need some help understanding where the money's going. If it's not paying for officers, which is what we budgeted for, what's happening, and why are we coming for ARP funding for what feels like a non-emergency staffing request, but probably something urgent, I think, in terms of us responding to the attrition, which feels like maybe a little bit of a separate issue. So, I wonder if either Director McPherson or DC Halverson can just help us understand what's happening with the budget in terms of payroll, and how is there not savings associated with having so many fewer staff?
Councilmember Fletcher, this is Robin McPherson. I'd be happy to answer your question on that. And you're right, some of this will come up tomorrow in Public Health and Safety meeting. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit for tomorrow's meeting, so I apologize. You're right, we will have payroll savings. And I know we've talked about this before a little bit. Normally, when we have a decrease in FTEs, active FTEs, people who are actually working out and doing their daily jobs, when those people leave, we have obviously payroll savings, and normally our overtime increases, and there's somewhat of an offset between the two. In this case, we have people who are on leave and are still being paid, and so our payroll savings is not as great. Coupled that with the cost of Operation Safety Net, which was not part of the budget for 2021, that is eating up a chunk of that payroll savings, and I suspect that information will be coming out sometime in the near future. But that is a chunk of that payroll savings. On top of that, we have COVID leave that was granted to the first responders, and that's taking out a chunk as well. And that's for basically, it can be either used for when people were sick with COVID or are sick with COVID. And if it wasn't used, then that's available for people. There's no cash value to it, but the first responders can use it after the fact. So those two things are probably the biggest chunk. We will, though, have some savings, and again, that's going to be a discussion for tomorrow, but we're anticipating a couple $1 million of savings that will go as an offset to our projection for overtime.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so we can get into more detail on that tomorrow, but I think that will be one of the questions that we need to work out. And
Sure.
you know, I think there probably is going to be some need to have some real public discussion about the money that was allocated to Operation Safety Net and how that was used, and how the public feels about taking rescue plan dollars and backfilling what we spent on Operation Safety Net rather than investing it in unsheltered homelessness or youth programming or any of the other significant deltas we see in the city where we have a need to make investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher. Council President Bender.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I had a lot of the same questions about those payroll savings and the costs of Operation Safety Net. I don't think other departments operate quite that way. Last summer, I think if Director Brennan would have gone and spent a few $1 million, we would have seen a different homelessness response than we did. And so again, it's just a little bit of a need to make sure that all of our city's priorities are operating in the same way and that policymakers know what's happening and have the full information that we need to be accountable to our constituents. So I do think having that information presented at committee will be really helpful. If the extent that we can get those numbers in writing will also help us make good policy decisions. I guess in addition to the questions that Councilmember Fletcher just asked, I'll note that the operations of Operation Safety Net in Brooklyn Center, after Dante Wright was killed by Brooklyn Center police, I think raised further questions about, again, the chain of command and operating policies. I am not fully familiar with Hennepin County Sheriff's Office practices and procedures and policies. I know that the City of Brooklyn Center has a little different form of government than we do, where the city council there does have policy authority over police practices and policies, whereas the City Council of Minneapolis does not currently have policy authority over the police department, which rests fully within the mayor's purview under our city charter. So in Brooklyn Center, the City Council passed an ordinance related to the use of less lethal weapons, and the Hennepin County Sheriff wrote a letter back saying that they would not follow the policies of the City of Brooklyn Center. So I'll just reiterate that concern I have and need for all of us to understand what we are approving when and if we approve contracts with agencies who are right now unnamed, whose policies we don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President Bender. I'm going to see if there are any more comments or questions. If not, then we have reached the end of the queue, and thus the end of our questions for this presentation. And so I just want to thank all of my colleagues for their questions. I want to thank staff, and I want to thank Amelia Kruger for this presentation and the information that we were provided. and you know, and the level of detail that we were able to get into, even though I know we all feel like we're working on short timelines and everybody's feeling that crunch and we want to be accountable. And so just very thankful for my colleagues, city staff, who are here to answer questions on the fly, and especially to Amelia Kruger. So thank you. So before adjourning today's meeting, I'll take the opportunity to review the remaining timeline in which we will work to allocate this round of funding from the American Rescue Plan Act. In terms of next steps, this committee has scheduled a public hearing on the proposed budget revision. This hearing is set for next Wednesday, June 16th, beginning at 6:05 p.m. This meeting is listed in the city's online speaking sign-up system so that folks can pre-register to speak at this hearing. That's next Wednesday, June 16th, beginning at 6:05 p.m. After our public hearing next week, the committee will conduct a markup session with proposed amendments from council members on Wednesday, June 23rd, beginning at 10 a.m. At this point, we will forward the amended package to the city council, to the full city council, with anticipated final action scheduled for our regular meeting on Friday, July 2nd at 9:30 a.m. The full schedule of meetings, as well as the sign-up sheet for public hearings, can be found in the city's Legislative Information Management System, or LIMS, at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Are there any questions regarding the schedule? I don't see any. Great. And so as we adjourn, just want to go over a few more things before we adjourn. Do any of my colleagues object to us canceling tomorrow's meeting on June 10th? So I'm not seeing any comment in the chat. So with that, we've concluded all business to come before the committee today. As I believe we have completed the vast majority of our discussion, I will adjourn today's meeting and instruct the clerk to cancel the adjourned meeting scheduled for tomorrow, June 10th at 10 a.m. That meeting was scheduled as a placeholder if the body needed more time to hear from our budget director and have additional discussion. So with the cancellation of tomorrow's meeting, our next meeting concerning the American Rescue Plan Act funding proposals is scheduled for a special meeting on June 16th at 6:05 p.m. At that point, this body will hold a public hearing on these proposals. Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.